Peter Singer is a professor of bioethics at Princeton. I feel called today to name where and how people came to be where they are. So let me just tell you that Professor Singer is an Australian whose Austrian Jewish parents fled from Vienna to Australia after Austria was annexed by Nazi Germany. In other words, his people fled war and danger and threat to their very existence in order to find a better life for themselves and their children. And then he came to this country, I'm assuming to avail himself of the opportunities it afforded. And there is nothing wrong with that story. Professor Singer, in his book, The Life You Can Save, talks about how a single story of a life that's lost or in danger has this power to move us to great altruism and commitment of soul and body. Whereas statistics of evil, no matter how large they can be, how shocking, somehow move us to give and to serve at much lower rates. Something about the human psyche is such that our hearts and our willpower and our conscience needs something to make the call concrete and fleshed, specific and real. One woman who goes inspecting the detention facility says the thing that gives her hope is that she has been able to start telling the stories and others are telling them. And that, she feels, is the key. So we told 8 stories, showed 8 photographs, named 8 children, read their ages, words from their parents, details of their suffering and death, 8 chances to awaken. Neo-Confucian thinker Mencius, whose life spanned the 4th and into the 3rd centuries before the Common Era, he offered what he thought was proof that the human character was actually hardwired for compassion. His proof was the example of a baby crawling toward a well. Mencius said no one would hesitate seeing a child crawling toward a well to rush to save the child. They wouldn't ask whose child it is or whether that child is worth saving. We human beings, he argued, had something innate, something that responded to vulnerability, particularly of our own kind, and therein lay the seed, the sprouts of virtue that we were to nurture in life through action and reflection, sending them deep into heart and soul until full-grown virtue, a character of benevolence, was who we were. So this morning we heard about 8 children who crawled into the well. While we watched, most of whom could have been saved. And what we know right now is that there are thousands of other children crawling toward wells, because there are more than 11,000 children being held by the US government on any given day, according to a July 3rd article in the Atlantic Monthly. They are packed into facilities that weren't designed for children, not made for the numbers of children who are there. We have seen photos of cages and bodies lined up, one right next to each other with only mylar blankets. And we hear of outbreaks of influenza, of lice. We have reports of inspectors, experts in early childhood education and development who say that the caloric count of the food is inadequate except for the smallest of children. So children cold and starving, children being cared for, it turns out, by other children, 2-year-olds given into the custody of 7-year-olds who have no idea how to take care of a toddler. Children in clothes filthy, with bodily fluids, weeping, no chance for shower, hair matted like what inspectors saw in Clint, Texas. And there are thousands of people who are somebody's child, now of the age of adulthood, also in these camps. Right now, one report said 50,000 people are being held in facilities run by ICE, and something like 20,000 in facilities run by Customs and Border Protection, most in circumstances that are inhuman. One processing center in El Paso, my dad's hometown, had 900 migrants being held at a facility that was designed for 125. In some cases, cells designed for 35 people, and I'm sure that wasn't a spacious 35, are holding 155 people, the New York Times reported. So, yes, the camps need more doctors, more beds, more food, more showers, more heat in the cold ones, more air conditioning in the hot ones, more social workers to process paperwork quickly so people can be sent to the families that await them here as their asylum hearings wait to be held. But really, the camps need to be closed. Phil Zimbardo, professor of psychology at Stanford years ago, did his infamous, well, it was going to be a 2-week-long experiment in 1971. He took 24 middle-class, young, white college men who volunteered and had passed a psychological screening test. They all volunteered, some to be prisoners and some to be guards, and what happened spiraled out of control faster than anyone could have imagined. Within days, the previous normal, ethical, moral young people who were now guards got increasingly cruel, many of them, abusive, some of them, punishing secretly at night when they thought none of the researchers would be watching. Using power over to diminish, and the so-called prisoners started to show signs of trauma, weeping and screaming and withdrawing. On day 6, Christina Maslach, a recent Stanford PhD who was brought in to conduct interviews with the guards and the prisoners, called Zimbardo to account for what was clearly immoral as she watched men being walked to the bathrooms with bags over their heads. And the experiment was called to a close a week before it was supposed to end. In 6 days, my friends, in 6 days, good young people had become traumatized prisoners and guards and abused their power. And everyone who read about it, but especially those within it, knew how easily it was for all of us to slide into evil when the stage was set. Still, though, we set the stage. We imprison folks. And if power corrupts, as it does, we who are questioning of authority in our very bones as Unitarian Universalists, we know power corrupts. It's why we watch it carefully. If power corrupts, then absolute power corrupts absolutely, as it often does. So what then do we expect of camps made up of brown people in jail in a white supremacist, racist culture, brown people who have no rights on this soil? And what do we think happens when the least powerful, the children, are put under lock and key without even the courage of a parent to defend them? We have laid the table for evil. There are stories already of Lord of the Flies-like hierarchies and rules developing in each cell in which these random groups of children are thrown together to fend for themselves. Who will get a bed, who will get what privileges or chores are assigned, bullies and leaders, and the bullied. Children left to their own devices, and guards who pull out the beds and cots as punishment, leaving children to sleep on the cold concrete floors. Children, right, whose immune systems are worn thin by stress through 1,000, 2,000-mile journeys of being underfed, sleeping in the outdoors, under stressful circumstances, to say the least. So can we be surprised when they get sick? Or are we surprised that there aren't more tragedies to tell of? And if evil, cruelty, abuse shows up in our detention camps, can we ever pretend surprise? Really? Honestly, people. We have history to teach us. We have Zimbardo. Our own hearts know what happens when no one is looking too often, when power protects the adults, some of them, and not the children. Only willful ignorance can pretend that this is a recipe for anything less than a good chance of human beings' inhumanity to other human beings. Welcome to the US, we say. Allow us to abuse and traumatize you and scar you for life, you who are fleeing poverty and unspeakable violence. You who are not so unlike many of our own ancestors. So we people who would rush without thinking to save a child crawling toward a well, we have dug wells, it looks like, and are pushing children toward them. Never again, we once said, never again would we put people in camps. We said that to our Japanese neighbors when they came home to find their businesses and their homes sold off to neighbors who cashed in on the disenfranchisement that was based solely on race. Or with families torn apart like my beloved friend Sat Oishi's was by what happened in the camps. Never again, we said, when our soldiers returned from Europe, seeing and liberating those camps of walking skeletons, those the lucky ones. And refugees from genocide took the remnants of their lives, like my best friend's parents, and began to resuscitate their future from the ashes. Never again, we said, would we let human beings be motivated by hate or notions of racial superiority or use fear without us challenging that rhetoric. Never again, when slavery ended and we wrenched power from white hands in the civil rights movement and white Americans began, as we did, to reckon with our original sin in the founding of this nation, never again would we allow ourselves to see some human beings as fully human and others as 3/4 of a human being or no person at all. Never again, when we reckoned with the theft of land, this Ohlone land included, and called it our own and murdered and cheated to keep it. Never again would we think of the boundaries of yours and mine so simple-mindedly, knowing fully the history of this place we call our own, and maybe as micro-reparations for the theft and Manifest Destiny's brand of state-sponsored terrorism, maybe we would share what we took. Will we? Never again is easy to say, and harder to mean, and harder still to live. I have a colleague, Stephen Jonason, who's the large church consultant for the denomination. He used to say that sometimes congregations forget their best selves, and in those moments, we, the moral leaders, we, the loyal, faithful members, we keep those best selves in sacred keeping, he said, until the community can reclaim it. I loved that idea of our responsibility. And the same is true for us as individuals. Sometimes someone keeps our own best self in sacred keeping, and the same is true of nations, right? Not that we won't forget our best selves, because we have again and again, and we will, but that when we forget, we hope and we trust that someone or some group of people, something will draw us back to reclaim our best self. We are in that time again. Time to remember what we said we would not forget. Time to shed our desire for comfort and surrender to the routines of life with their smaller challenges. Time to surrender the desire to do what is socially acceptable and maybe begin to lose a little more sleep than we already have. Hit the pavements, talk about the unseemly, the political, wear our conscience on our sleeves, spend our money where it has even the chance to bring leverage for change. Time to say never again and mean it. Time to do so until the us gets bigger. And the strain of our voice, to rephrase poet Naomi Shihab Nye, catches the strain of all voices and entrains the world in the same call for humanity and reckoning, until justice rolls down like waters and beloved community means all of us, and the human family doesn't stop at a border, and the least of us is safe. Time to catch the children. Time to catch everyone. This week, Catholic priests and nuns and lay folks protested in Washington. There are reports leaking out of Border Patrol agents who are speaking from consciences that will not be quieted about what is going on. There are people taking to the streets all around this country. There is a tide rising. So the good, great news is we are not alone. It's just our job to do as we will today and join our power and our privilege and put our creative, witnessing energies into the rising tide. Because one story is enough to break your heart, and there are already too many stories, and more will follow if nothing changes. So, today we declare that never again begins now. Never again. What it means will unfold. But as one wise person once said, she said it from the pulpit just last week, we do what we can and we trust in the mystery. And as another wise person said, no snowflake ever knows whether it will be the cause of the avalanche. So, my beloved snowflakes, we will go forward to resist.